if you're a fan of Brandon Sanderson, or if you watched any of my recent videos, you've heard me talk about Adonalsium, the closest to a god that the Cosmere has, whose shattering roughly 10,000 years ago has influenced all of the events in the Cosmere. Now, I know recently I've been talking about Adonalsium a lot, but in this video, I want to pull all of those various threads together to form what I think is my definitive view of what will happen with Adonalsium in the future. So in this video, I'm going to posit that Adonalsium left behind a legacy that is separate and distinct from the 16 shards that he was shattered into. And if there are forces or individuals, some potentially well-meaning, that seek to reconstitute or reform Adonalsium, it will be the single biggest catastrophe that the Cosmere has seen to date. But if it isn't clear already, this video will include spoilers for everything in the Cosmere. All of the Stormlight Archive up to the end of Wind and Truth, Mistborn, including Mistborn eras 1 and 2, and the Secret History. I'll draw from Tress of the Emerald Sea and the Sunlit Man, but I don't know if I'm necessarily spoiling their plots. So with that, let's get into it. But first, let's start with the basics. So Adonalsium was some sort of a powerful entity or deity responsible for some, if not all, creation in the Cosmere. And roughly 10,000 years ago, 16 or maybe a few other individuals, including the 16, shattered Adonalsium into 16 separate shards. In Mistborn Secret History, Chris, who's a world hopper, says, "Anyway, there was a god, Adonalsium. I don't know if it was a force or a being, though I suspect the latter. 16 people together killed Adonalsium, ripping it apart and dividing its essence between them, becoming the first who ascended, capital A, ascended." And she explains that they did so for diverse reasons or motives. Some wished for the power that was constituted in Adonalsium. Others saw Adonalsium as, killing Adonalsium as the only good option available to them. And we know that in addition to the 16 that took up the shards, Wit and then potentially Frost, who's a dragon from Yolen, were also present at the shattering, but didn't take up any of Adonalsium's power. Adonalsium was shattered using the Dawnshards, and there's 4 of them, which in the novella Dawnshard is described as the 4 primal commands that created all things, and that were eventually used to undo Adonalsium himself, or itself, excuse me. And at the end of Wind and Truth, by the end of Wind and Truth, we know at least 2 of those 4 primal commands. They are change, carried by Risen, and exist, carried by Wit, who then passes it on to Sixo. But Adonalsium isn't only the god that died creating the shards, the 16 shards. I think that he left behind a legacy that is separate and distinct from those shards, a lot of which to me feels like it centers right now around the Rosharan system. And so specifically, there are 3 facets of, I think, that legacy that are separate from the shards. One is the creation of Roshar and the Roshar's moons themselves. 2 is the creation of the original spren of Roshar. Those are the wind, the stone, and the night. And then 3, the 4th moon that is hidden within the Rosharan system. So to talk through the first one, which is the creation of the Rosharan system itself, I want to start by first looking at the epigraphs in Words of Radiance, where Frost, who, as I said, I think was one of the dragons that were present at the shattering of Adonalsium, writes to Hoid, or Wit, and he says that the worlds you now tread, i.e. Roshar, bear the touch and the design of Adonalsium. And he urges him towards non-interference within Roshar as a result of that. And it does seem like Adonalsium had some sort of special focus on Roshar, unlike other planets. Scadrial is a good example where that doesn't feel like it had Adonalsium's special attention. In fact, Chris in Mistborn Secret History explains that Scadrial and all of the people on Scadrial were created by Ruin and Preservation, the 2 shards residing there, not by Adonalsium itself. Further, cultivation and honor also speak about Rosharan and its inhabitants as remnants of the being that they betrayed, i.e. Adonalsium. And in fact, honor speaks of the singers that were there prior to honor, cultivation, and odium's arrival in the Rosharan system as a curious variety of beings that could hear the songs of the gods, i.e. the singers. Adonalsium also appears to have been the creator of the original spren of Rosharan, the wind, the stone, and the night. And each of them with divine instructions or divine mandate to either protect, nurture, or to shroud. And of those original spren, by the time of the Wind and Truth, the night in particular is missing. And her divine mandate was to shroud, as I said. And I think what she may be shrouding is the fourth moon, the third aspect of Adonalsium's legacy. So I just want to briefly talk about what the fourth moon is, because I think there's a lot of theories. I know there are a lot of theories out there. Honor or Tanavas in Wind and Truth describes his awareness of pieces of something fallen, a fourth moon in splinters, sheltering from his eyes, with people that up until this point had been hidden from him. And these pieces of something fallen, he describes, were located on the shattered plains. The stones, when speaking to Venli, also explain that there is something hidden on the shattered plains that the stones describe as alien stones and the fourth moon within the heart of Rosharan that still exists and are hidden or shrouded from everyone. So I know there are a lot of different theories out there about this fourth moon, including the influence of other shards that we haven't really interacted with yet in the Cosmere, but I find it hard to believe that as a creator of the Rosharan system with a special focus on Rosharan, I find it hard to believe that Adonalsium didn't have some hand in the things that existed on Rosharan before the shards arrived, like the fourth moon. And as the creator of the night, I suspect that the night is involved in shrouding this fourth moon from the eyes of the shards. There's one other piece of this in Mistborn Secret History, where Chris explains that her belief is that there is an original planet with original peoples that is shrouded and hidden somewhere in the Cosmere, which I think could be a reference to whatever is hidden on Rosharan, shrouded potentially by the night, which I think could be a reference to the fourth moon. But all of this adds up to me that Adonalsium's legacy is not necessarily about the shards, and in fact could suggest that his creations outside of his shattering could actually play some sort of counterbalancing influence to the shards in the longer term. The issue is, I think, or the risk here is, that it is entirely possible that as key characters or forces in the Cosmere either grow more Cosmere aware or draw upon their existing belief systems, they may seek to reform or unite Adonalsium, which I think could actually be disastrous for the Cosmere. It's very possible that in the future we do see people try to reunite Adonalsium. In fact, the shattering of Adonalsium is presented as like one of the major sins of the Cosmere. And Wit, for example, does seem to talk about how he feels some remorse for his role in the shattering. In fact, in Tress of the Emerald Sea, he says that his involvement in the plot to kill Adonalsium was reckless. And in Wind and Truth, he explains to Kaladin that the only god he's ever known is the one that he rejected and killed, essentially. And there are belief systems across the Cosmere that I think speak to the shattering of Adonalsium and potentially may seek to restore Adonalsium. For one, Dalinar has had one kind of command over the course of his entire arc in the Stormlight Archive, which is to unite them. And he's interpreted that very differently over the course of the books. But I think now that Dalinar is essentially the Blackthorn of a cognitive shadow under the control of Retribution, it could lead Retribution to, or it could lead the Blackthorn to seek to restore or reunite the shards back into Adonalsium. The Iriali religion also has this belief system that their people will be eventually gathered back into the One once the seventh land is attained. And this could refer to many different things. It could refer to the restoration of a shard, for example, but it also could lead the Iriali as a civilization or factions of the Iriali who may seek to restore, reunite the shards back into Adonalsium. And I want to talk about why this is so bad and could actually end up risking Adonalsium's legacy, the part of his legacy that is not about the shards themselves. In Way of Kings, Wit tests out Dalinar's Cosmere awareness by asking Dalinar if he knew what Adonalsium is. And at the time, Dalinar's I don't know what you're saying. And then Wit kind of muses. He goes I wonder if you could do that to a man. Basically, pull him apart and then combine him back together into something else, like Odyssean Imean. And then Wit says that if you do that, you should name him Gibberish because it doesn't make sense. And to me, I think this implies that you can't just pull apart Adonalsium and then stitch it all back together in the exact same way. Even if it's you're talking about God. In fact, I think one of the key themes across the Cosmere novels has been that any of the shards devoid of the balancing influence of the other shards end up taking their intent to extreme imbalanced levels. And I think over the course of the last 10,000 years, we've seen many of the negative aspects of even noble shards manifest themselves. Honor, of course, is a good example of having an adherence to oaths without context has some pretty negative implications. Cultivation's focus on growth also kind of ends up perpetuating some level of constant conflict on Roshar. And even Harmony is basically finds it difficult to act because of the conflicting intents of the shards that he holds. So if you end up taking these shards that have had 10,000 years to be the most extreme versions of their intents and trying to put them back together into one whole, I think that one whole could be super dystopian and be more malevolent, frankly, than a benevolent Adonalsium. And if Adonalsium had a grand plan, I really don't think this is what it would be. In fact, I think it would be about those aspects of his legacy that I talked about, whether it's the fourth moon that we still need to, I think, fully understand, whether it's a spren or something else, and not a reconstituted Adonalsium. So it's kind of a terrifying prospect for what might happen in the future, and it makes me really nervous for the future of the Cosmere. So what do you think? I feel like there's a lot here, but this, as I said, tries to pull together all of the various thoughts around Adonalsium that have been percolating in my head, and I'd love to know what you think in the comments below. And if you like this kind of content, please like the video, please subscribe. I continue to try to post hopefully on a weekly basis from now on all things Cosmere. Thanks, everyone.